and Oliveira Lawyers. Today is Wednesday, August the 13th. We are starting one more live stream. And as usual, if you are here with us today as a member of audience, you can pick topics of your interest to be discussed. It doesn't need to be legal stuff. Naturally, many people are gonna, show up with legal topics, but it doesn't mean you have to do the same if you wanna, just discuss life in general in Brazil or Portugal. If you wanna discuss, like the current events, you are free and welcome to do so. And while we're waiting for our audience to post topics of their interest, we're gonna take a look at the Brazilian newspaper Estadão, right? This is Estadão, and this is the main headline. Very interesting that the main headline, very typical about the United States, and the message here is about the tariffs, right? And rescue against the U.S. tariffs. We'll have a 30 billion reais in credit, purchases made by the Brazilian government, and postponement of taxes, right? So this is like the main, measure or, remedy coming from the Brazilian federal government regarding the tariffs applied by the United States. Okay, there is also this note over here. Lula says the tariff is not going to remain unchallenged, and that the North American people and Trump will suffer the consequences. So he's pretty much threatening here U.S. citizens and President Trump, right? President Lula is, sometimes known for, saying things that he shouldn't say. He's not exactly like diplomatic in his comments, so maybe there was an unfortunate comment, right? He's threatening very directly here U.S. citizens and President Trump. There are other aspects, about the tariffs. But what I think is very interesting is like if you scroll down here, you're gonna see and again, this is like the main page of. I'm not sure if Estadão is like the second largest newspaper, but for sure it is one of the largest newspapers in Brazil, and this is on the main page, right? And they have this whole article about Zuckerberg, and that the article here says, Zuckerberg bought 11 houses in the same neighborhood, right? And they, kind of have a lot of news related to Zuckerberg and also Meta AI, and other stuff. But I think it's so interesting because I'm always reading New York Times and Wall Street Journal, and I haven't read anything about Zuckerberg. 11 houses, but here we go. In a Brazilian newspaper, you can know everything about Zuckerberg, right? So that highlights again, how much interest the United States, represent to Brazilians, right? So no matter, it doesn't matter how politics are. It does not matter, sometimes, a certain level of animosity between the two countries. The Brazilian population is always excited about things from the United States. All right, so that was it for today. Let's go back to our chat window. We have Code Academy. How's it going, Code Academy? I need work permit from Brazil and V10-5 visa processing service. All right, so let me ask you something, Code Academy. From which country are you coming? Are you based in a certain country? And tell me also, if you don't mind, about your nationality. And then I can tell you, if there is any nuances, because nowadays Brazil is doing a lot of different, or is applying a lot of different standards depending on where you're coming from. and I think this is a global trend. Governments are, like kind of trying to pick, like which nationals they are going to allow more access to the country. That's something you see now, at the United States, and it has been always the case for the United States and for Europe. Like, this is a growing trend, particularly in Portugal. There is a new package of legislation being enacted as we speak, about immigration. And, there is a lot of, naturally, disputes between the two sides of the aisle, but things are changing substantially. So Portugal, traditionally has been very, generous in terms of giving a passport for anyone who has been living legally in Portugal for 5 years, right? So Spain typically will require much longer than 5 years. And now Portugal was considering, changing this 5 years to 10 years. And it looks like it's going to settle with something like 7 or 8 years of legal stay in the country for people to achieve for people to be qualified to apply for either the permanent residency or the citizenship. So going back, Code Academy, Brazil is going to, make different things available depending on your nationality. And for you to enter the country is also going to depend on where you are located as you speak. Maybe just to give you some, general information about the work permit, right? Like the work permit, typically if there is a sponsor, you're going to be able to obtain this visa. And there is a need for an application to be done in Brazil on your behalf. And again, this is going to require a full participation from the sponsor, which should be naturally a company employing your services, right? And there is a lot of, there are many documents that the company will have to provide. But if you have, all the requirements, the way it works is the visa is approved in Brazil, right, through an immigration body located in Brazil. And once this visa is approved, then the paperwork is sent to the consulate in the country in which you legally reside, right? It cannot be a third country. It got to be the same country in which you reside. And then, yes, you can basically just go to either, a consulate, if it is a consulate, or an embassy, if it is an embassy, and get the paperwork done so you can enter the country. Aaron, good to see you, Aaron. Good morning. If I live in Brazil under the digital nomad visa and later I get citizenship, will those taxes go towards my retirement in Brazil? Will those taxes go towards my retirement in Brazil? So you're probably asking about, like Social Security, right, Aaron? So Social Security, right? So if you're living in Brazil under the digital nomad, because there are two components, Aaron, like, the taxes, right? Like the federal taxes, typically, you don't get something in exchange for your taxes. It's basically just money that you need to pay because you are a legal resident in Brazil. And the concept here is that, like you using the country's roads, like, there is police workforce around, right? Like, there is a whole like government apparatus, like out there to allow you to live in Brazil, right? So that's more the exchange that you get for your taxes. On the Social Security front, on the other hand, typically Brazil doesn't charge you, like the Social Security contributions. Meaning that you're not going to have to pay stuff additional to your federal taxes, but at the same time, it doesn't accrue, meaning that you're not going to get something out of it in the future. All right, Aaron is complimenting. It seems weird to pay taxes after 180 days. and not see a return on that in the future because I never applied for citizenship. Yes, I completely get it, Aaron. And one strategy, right? Like, I mean, there is not a workaround. The reality is pretty much what I told you, right? I mean, you don't really get something in exchange for federal taxes paid. Is more like for what you are enjoying right now, not in the future, right? Like if you are in Brazil, again, using like public infrastructure, public services, there is a taxation cost, right? But I get what you say, and what I can tell you is like maybe to share from a very high perspective, a strategy that some people will apply. They are going to do a combo, right? So instead of remaining in Brazil like on a more continued basis, they are going to limit their stay to 6 months a year, right? So some of the combos, like I heard before from, clients, Brazil and Argentina, Brazil and Paraguay, Brazil and Uruguay, Brazil and Portugal, okay? And sometimes Brazil and their, country of origin, right? Like, let's say if they are coming from another country in Europe or even in the United States, they are going to stay no more than 180 days, right? Like they never do like 183 because then, if you do a calculation wrong, like, I mean, you could hurt yourself. So typically people are going to limit themselves to 180 days. And then, you're playing by the rules. Like you stay 180 days, you have to pay zero taxes to Brazil, and you still get to enjoy Brazil for a whole half year. All right, Aaron? So unfortunately, no workaround on the taxes, not much that you're going to get in the future. But if you do a combo, if you do a combination of countries and you don't exceed 180 days in Brazil, you can have a very fulfilling experience in Brazil as a resident, right? Without necessarily triggering the taxes. All right, Voyages. How you doing, Voyages? Good morning. Great to be able to watch this session again. We're happy to have you here, Voyages. Do you have offices in the U.S.? If yes, where? And also, what type of services do you offer, please? Voyages. Yes, we have a location. Like I would say that our location in the U.S. is the one in Dallas, right? It's actually in North Dallas, in the city of Frisco. We also have a co-sharing location in El Segundo, California, but that's not like an office with people working in there. Our office in Frisco typically it has at least one person working. We receive a lot of documents in this Dallas location, such as birth certificates, FBI background checks. We do assist many of our clients with their U.S. paperwork for the purpose of applying for visas and residencies in Brazil. So that's what we do. We don't offer like in-person consultations typically at any of our locations. Our offices in Brazil, naturally, that's where most of our team is. And still we don't offer like in-person consultations just because we have different attorneys in our team, and they are not necessarily in the same office in which people would like to meet them. So we have this rule that instead of keeping scrambling to find a match in terms of time and location, all the onboarding consultations, they are done through Zoom. Okay. This said, I like to share that if you want to drop by some Brazilian coffee, as long as you don't try to get a consultation for free, you are welcome to drop by at our Brazilian offices, and we don't ask you to even give us a heads up because again, they are, staffed. We have the Brazilian coffee. You don't need to give a heads up. You just come and meet with us, right? But if you need a consultation, then you schedule a consultation through Zoom. I take some of the consultations myself. Today we have Caroline, who's also an attorney here at the firm. She does take some of the consultations. And we also have Jocássia, who's probably going to be joining us, anytime soon. In terms of services, the services that we provide, most of other services, voyages, most of our services are related to either immigration or real estate. Something we have started, more recently is like a litigation. And naturally, there is always a need for litigation, for support, to troubleshoot disputes. That's something else we offer. There are also, things more related to family law, such as probates, support for marriages and divorces, and so on. All right, Voyages, thank you for asking. Denzio Mason, good afternoon, Luciano. Good afternoon, Denzio. Like to see this flag. It tells where Denzio is coming from, right, Denzio? And how are your plans going, Denzio? Do you have any plans for Brazil? Let us know how your journey is progressing. Yui, boa tarde. Boa tarde, Yui. Good to see you. Is there some official data on crime stats of each city in Brazil? What's the website? Yuri, yes, there are some stats maintained by the IBGE, which is like the official federal agency in charge of keeping those stats, right? I'm not sure if they publish all of them. Sometimes they publish just like a summary of their findings. Okay, but I've been using ChatGPT a lot to identify those reports whenever they are published out there. Now there is ChatGPT 5, right? Like the new version. And what I like about ChatGPT 5, and I don't know, there is an ongoing backlash, against ChatGPT 5, but what I like in this new version is that it looks like it is hallucinating much less than the prior version, right? But yes, if you just run this query, I think you would get access to some of the sources, but as far as I know, they typically publish the summaries using different media and different channels. Yuri, also, do you know any census data that divides areas by heritage? For example, if you miss Germany while you live in Brazil, which city would one want to visit to find some culture and food from Germany? That's an interesting question, Yuri. I mean, this is more a type of knowledge that we know, from heart, or it's just like traits of the, local cultures in Brazil. And typically, right, like the Germany culture is going to be very present in the south of the country. So Santa Catarina, right? Santa Catarina is the second state from down up. And there is a lot of, a Germany, type of cities, like cities that were actually founded by Germans, I don't know, maybe a couple of 100 years ago, but you will still find many of the events that you would find in Germany. You're gonna find the same events in Brazil. A very famous one that most of you will probably know is like Oktoberfest. So Oktoberfest is a huge event in Santa Catarina. In as long as I remember, as far as I remember, I think it's in Joinville, and it is like people from all over the country, they are going to come to Oktoberfest in Santa Catarina, and it's a huge party, right? Like I remember, in my 20s, I used to travel, to Oktoberfest in Santa Catarina, and they would have, it was not like a fire truck. It was like a look-alike truck, and they would distribute like beers to people in the cars, in the buses, and they would have a hose with beer as well. And it was just, pure madness, right? Like, I mean, it was a more of an event naturally for, the youngsters. But just sharing, something that is typical to Santa Catarina, and they're pretty big in terms of German culture, right? But, let us know if you find something, Yuri, to that effect, let us know. There's a lot of interesting sharing here at the live streams. I remember, something that I didn't know is that nowadays, and it was shared by one of you, maybe you are with us right now, if you want to have a temporary cell phone plan in Brazil, you can go to one of the local stores, meaning, the service providers, and they have a way of setting up the service without the Brazilian tax ID, right? Because if you just go to a newsstand and buy the SIM card and you insert into your phone, you're not going to be able to get the service activated because you don't have a tax ID, right? So many people would assume that, the tax ID is a deal breaker for you to have a local service. But someone here in the live stream shared that they were able to get it done, at the, if I'm not mistaken, Vivo store. That's one of the cell phone service providers. So there's a lot of information we exchange here. It's not just like a monologue. And yes, Yui, if you know any of those sources of information, if you find out, right, like better saying, then if you would be kind to share with us, that would be great. Aaron, that makes sense now. I thought they would charge Social Security taxes to after 180 days. Thanks for clarifying. Absolutely, Aaron. And yes, and this is an interesting question, Aaron, because as far as I know, and I want to make sure I'm clear, I'm not an expert in Portugal taxes. But as far as I remember, Portugal, yes, would charge you Social Security taxes, if you are a digital nomad living in Portugal. So your question makes a lot of sense. All right, Jonathan Macmillan. Olá, Luciano. Good to hear your wisdom. Good to have you here, Jonathan. How long does it take to get a Brazilian visa to visit using your law firm? Jonathan, it looks like it is something, around the 3 days, okay? That's the average time, 3 days, or let's say if there are no glitches. If there are no glitches, Jonathan, our team can typically get you the e-visa issued with 3 days. It's just a heads up. I don't like, people to rely on the 3 days. Because if there are any exceptions in your profile, guess what? They are typically unable to get the e-visa issued, right? Not our team. I'm talking about the e-visa platform. The e-visa platform is available for those without any glitches, without any past histories with Brazilian immigration, without any points of concern. If there is a point of concern in your profile, the e-visa platform will typically flag your application. They're going to tell, listen, unfortunately, we cannot process your application. And guess what? You're going to need to deal with the Brazilian consulate, right? Of course, nobody wants to be in that spot. The Brazilian consulates, like most consulates out there, right? Just like the Portuguese consulate and just pretty much any other consulate out there, they are overworked and they are facing more demand than they can handle. So you don't want to be in that position, right? But unfortunately, typically it's going to be a hit or a miss. All right, Jonathan. So yes, 3 days, it could be a guideline, as long, again, as there is nothing in your profile that would require a more typical visa issuance process. Bill, good to see you, Bill. Oi, Luciano. Question on e-visa. Why do I have to schedule a trip when I get my visa? when the e-visa is good for 10 years. Can I or can't I get an e-visa without booking a trip at this time? No, Bill, you cannot. You must book the trip, okay? And I get your point. You're saying, listen, if I'm going to get 10 years, like, I mean, they're not going to ask me to book the flights for 10 years, right? So what sense would it make for them to ask for a trip if they're going to give me anyhow, 10 years? I think it's more, for diligence. Like, I mean, they don't want people, applying for the visa bill unless they are actually in the process of traveling to Brazil, right? That's very typical of Brazilian immigration. Whenever you are asking for something, they want to make sure that you are firm about your commitment. They don't want to spend the time on someone who's just planning for the future, right? So that's the concept behind this request. Now, from a practical perspective, Bill, something that you can do, you can just book something that you could, either cancel later, or if you can't cancel, that you could, basically get the credit back to use for another trip, right? Like American Airlines typically offers as an upgrade. So let's say if you're getting a round trip to Brazil from the Dallas area, right? Let's say the typical flight is gonna cost like $1,100, $1,200 US dollars, and typically for an additional $100 or $150, you can upgrade your ticket in a way that you can reschedule without a penalty, or even cancel the trip and just keep the credit to be used in the future. All right, Bill. So you're not stuck with that trip if something changes in the meantime. All right. So that's a practical tip to reduce the burden of having to schedule a trip and get a round ticket in order for you to qualify for the e-visa. Sax Dragon, boa tarde, Luciano. Hey, Dragon, I will see the beauty and majesty of Brazil this weekend. I can't wait. That's so exciting, Dragon. So are you arriving in Brazil this weekend? Is that so? And by the way, I gave a heads up to our people in São Paulo, right? Like I said, listen, Dragon is planning to, come over, and if he comes towards the end of the day, he may be bringing some, musical equipment, and then we're gonna buy some wine and cheese, to celebrate the new office, Dragon. So there you go. All right, like if you're planning to come, just give us a heads up. You can send an email, to our São Paulo office, and I can do over here is I can write an email over here. All right, so this is the email for our São Paulo office, Dragon. Just let them know, and then we're going to make sure there is some, wine and cheese for our team to appreciate your acoustic at the office, all right? Voyages Journeys, muito obrigado, senhor. You're welcome, Voyages. We'll have some follow-ups regarding that in the future. Happy to be of assistance, Voyages. Denzil Mason, does an apostille, the birth certificate, expire in Brazil, or do you need to redo the apostille? After all, we are only born once. I agree 100% with you, Denzil. And I can explain to you, where, this idea of getting a fresh birth certificate comes from. You're going to understand in a second. But let's first give you an answer, right? So for the purpose of immigration, there is no expiration for a birth certificate with an apostille. Let's say if you apostilled 10 years ago, in theory, the Brazilian immigration would be happy to accept the apostilled birth certificate. However, if you're buying property in Brazil, if you're buying real estate, it's going to be very typical of the registries to require your birth certificate to be issued within 90 days of the closing, right? And now that's where the distinction exists, and it goes like this. In Brazil, we have our birth certificates as a kind of roadmap or a tracker for our life events, right? So if I marry, guess what? They are going to annotate the marriage on my birth certificate. If I divorce, guess what? A new annotation on my birth certificate. If I die, guess what? The death is going to be annotated on the birth certificate. So the idea of asking you for a fresh, recent birth certificate is to understand where you are in your journey right now, particularly from a ownership's perspective, like in Brazil. It's not like in the United States or the UK, in which you can go and buy a property by yourself, even though you're married, right? There is no such a thing in Brazil. In Brazil, if you're married, you cannot buy a property as a single person. And therefore, the registries, they are going to be extremely concerned, or they are going to be extremely interested in understanding your current civil status. And in their heads, in the United States and in the UK, things are going to work just like they do in Brazil. And we all know that's not the case. In the UK, in the United States, nobody is going to add an annotation to your birth certificate when you marry. Nobody is going to add another annotation when you divorce, right? That's not how things work in the UK. That's not how things work in the US. But the registries, they don't know better, right? They don't know better. They just assume that, things everywhere else work just the same way as they work in Brazil. And therefore, if you're going to buy a property, yes, they are going to typically ask you for a fresh apostilled version of your birth certificate to verify your civil status, all right? Now, very interesting, like Rio de Janeiro is probably one of the very few states that are starting to, let go of this requirement, because guess what? Given the huge number of U.S. citizens and citizens from the U.K. and other countries in the state and in the city, at this point, pretty much everyone knows that it doesn't make much sense to establish this parallel or to assume that registries in other countries work like they do in Brazil, right? So in Rio de Janeiro, more specifically in Rio de Janeiro City, we do have transactions that sometimes are not going to have the requirement for an apostilled birth certificate to be presented, right? Interesting enough, like São Paulo is also a major destination for foreign citizens, but we still typically require the birth certificate. Not we as the law firm, right? Like we as the state, we still require a recent apostilled birth certificate as a condition for you to buy a property if you are representing to be single. Okay, now if you are representing a married status, guess what? They are not going to be asking for your apostilled birth certificate. They are going to be asking for your apostilled marriage certificate. All right. I hope that was helpful, Denzel, to help you understand why the need for a fresh birth certificate. Mary Lou. Hello, Mary Lou. Good morning, Luciano. Thank you for the broadcast. Is it possible for a resident with a nomad visa to open a business in Brazil? That's an interesting question, Mary Lou, and thank you for showing up for our live stream, right? And the answer goes like this. You are free to open a business in Brazil whether or not you are a legal resident, right? So for you to open a business, you don't need the digital nomad residency. If you have the residency, is not going to affect your ability to have the business. However, the way it works is like this. Like you can own the stocks, the shares at the company that you are starting in Brazil. However, because you are not a permanent resident, you cannot be the legal representative for the entity, right? So typically, what people are going to do, they are going to hire someone, to keep their books and also act as the legal representative for the entity, right? And typically, you know, you're not going to find this service very easily because if you think about it, the whole point of requiring a legal resident, right, like a legal representative who's also a permanent resident, is to have someone on the hook for taxes and labor obligations. All right. So the concern here, you know, from the Brazilian government is that if you allow foreign citizens to come over, start a business, and just go away, you know, like they are going to live unpaid taxes, and they are going to live like, you know, employees without a payment, right? Like, so this is the whole point of requiring a legal representative, right? And it's not only that, you know, like, I mean, recently there were issues with, you know, Elon Musk, for instance, right? Like Elon Musk said, you know what? You know, like people are chasing our, you know, our employees in Brazil, you know, trying to hurt them because of the dispute with the Brazilian Supreme Court. So he basically said, you know what? We're going to basically shut down our offices and say goodbye, and that's it, right? And then immediately the legal system, right, like the judiciary, more specifically, one ministry, right, like Alexandre de Moraes, he said, well, if you don't have you know, a legal representative in the country, guess what? We're going to shut down your platform over here, right? And then the way they do is like, you know, if anyone allows X to be broadcasted in the country, they are going to apply, you know, extreme fines, because these people would be helping like a foreign business or a business that was actually, you know, established in Brazil, but no longer with a legal representative to operate in the country, right? So, but I'm just like giving you elements to help you understand this concept of a legal representative, right? But let's just recap and try to make it, you know, concise. You can have a business, you can open a business in Brazil, whether or not you have the digital nomad. But unfortunately, you're going to need to hire someone to act as your legal representative, because digital nomad, yes, it grants you residency, but it is just a temporary residency, Mary Lou. I hope that was helpful. Travel Jones, boa tarde. I was able to get my CPF. It arrived Monday. I followed your instructions from your site. Thank you. Glad to hear, Travel. So glad to hear about that. Congratulations for your CPF tax ID. You know, glad to hear. Bill, thank you. Okay, what if I have less than $2,000 in 2 years? Do they check? So yes, Bill. I mean, they typically, I don't recall if the $2,000 is a balance, right? Like, I mean, I don't do the applications myself. I do know about the requirement, but typically any evidence that you provide, you know, like they typically, Bill, like they try to help you, right? So if you provide any evidence, like showing, you know, like money or, you know, some financial means, they are going to approve you, right? Like, I mean, they, at least for the e-visa, they are not that picky. For the residencies in Brazil, like the more longer-term ones, they are pickier for sure. But for the e-visa, you know, typically they're going to take anything that you provide and consider on a, you know, on a face value type of approach, right? So they're not going to be chasing the source. They're not going to be saying, well, is this thing true? Let me send an email to the bank or to someone, you know. They are going to be very accommodating typically, Bill. Dragon, yes, I will be in Brazil on Friday, and hopefully I can come visit within 2 weeks. I will save the email information and contact them ahead of time. Yes, Dragon. That's going to be really, really nice, right? So, yes, if you come over like later in the day, it's going to be a really nice event. Thank you for suggesting, by the way. Bill, hit the like button. Yes, folks, if you can like our live stream, I appreciate. The likes will help with our business, and they will help other people just like you to find this content. Appreciated, Bill. Appreciated all of you who are going to hit the like button. Voyages, all of those annotations on the birth certificate in Brazil, it means there are less places for mistakes, or is it a way of reminding one how far they have accomplished or failed in life? That's an interesting point, Voyages. I completely understand it is more like, a joke than a serious comment. But it is an interesting perspective. And, sometimes we have clients here, Voyages, that have married and divorced for a few times. And whenever you see their birth certificates, it does look like, a laundry list of events, right? So now I think it's going to be more, up to each of us, to assess, how they doing in life. But the point, like for the government and, the legal system is that we can actually track what you are, right? So not like from this perspective of accomplishments, is more on the legal perspective, right? Because again, in Brazil, we have many rules that do not exist in the US and the UK. For instance, if you die, you cannot leave all your assets to whoever you see fit, right? And in the US, it's super typical, right? Like you have, people who are going to grow older, they divorce, and then, eventually they leave their fortune like to a new girlfriend, right? Like, and most of the time, this will is going to hold water. Not in Brazil. In Brazil, we don't let that to happen, right? Like in Brazil, 50% of your assets, they are going to be distributed according to what the Brazilian law sees fit, right? So from that perspective, you see that Brazil is Brazil is more aggressive when it comes to tell you how to do things. And because of this approach, like when we have all these sequence of events on your birth certificate, we know where you are right now, right? So if you got divorced, we look at your birth certificate, the last event was a divorce, we know that you are a divorcee, right? And if you're buying property, guess what? The property is going to be recorded on your name only. But let's say you married and you never got divorced, you got separated, but there is no divorce annotation on your birth certificate. Guess what's going to happen? You're going to end up having to buy the property with your separated wife because the divorce was not finalized and recorded on your birth certificate, right? So that's the whole purpose of the annotations. But yes, I get your point. It's very interesting because if you look at your, birth certificate at a certain stage in your life, you're gonna see a bunch of things. Right now, the annotations, they are gonna be just like for those things I told you. And actually there are a few other things. For instance, if you become a disabled, and then you're gonna have someone taking custody of you as a warden, right? Like, I mean, this is gonna be recorded at the birth certificate as well. Again, to give people notice that you are not like in a correct state of mind, or you don't have the capabilities, for instance, to enter into contracts, right? So the idea of annotating stuff in someone's birth certificate is to give a notice to the society in general about how this person is at that given moment in time. All right. Another distinction, like in the United States, typically when you're gonna issue a birth certificate, typically the states expect that the person applying for this birth certificate is gonna be, the person themselves. Not in Brazil. In Brazil, like I can order, birth certificates without presenting a reason, right? Like I can, get a birth certificate, from a neighbor or from a prospective property seller. Is just natural because again, we want to know how this person is at that given moment in time to know if they're married or not. If he's married, guess what? I cannot buy a property just from him. I need to buy the property from him and his spouse. All right, so that's the main point. And Mary Lou, thank you, Mary Lou, for showing up. Denzio Mason, obrigado, Luciano. I will be back in Rio soon. Cheers. All right, Denzio, there you go. Great choice of place. Bill, no, this is if you already have the e-visa. All right, this if you already have the e-visa. Do they check? All right, so are you saying, now I get it, right? Like you get the e-visa, like if they're going to check if you have the $2,000. No, never saw that happening, Bill, right? This thing of checking money, right? This thing of checking money is pretty common in the United States, right? Like whenever immigrants are arriving, like travelers, visitors, the border control, the immigration officers are going to say, listen, how much are you bringing, right? And typically people are going to be advised to bring cash, bring at least some cash. I don't know, like $1,000 in cash. And you should also be able to show that you have enough balance in your cards to buy stuff on a card basis. Never saw that happening in Brazil, Bill. There is no need for you to prove, to show anything after you get the e-visa. You got the e-visa, 99% of the time, it's going to be just arriving in Brazil, saying, all right, I'm here for tourism, and that's it. All right. And so you don't need to worry about that. Thank you for clarifying, Bill. Jonathan, are there any kinds of American licenses that can be transferable, like driver's licenses or gun permits, conceal and carry licenses? Interesting question, Jonathan. And believe it or not, like one of them, it's kind of transferable, and that would be the driver license, right? Like so, typically, in most of the Brazilian states, you can bring your valid U.S. driver license and use that as the start point for your Brazilian driver license application, right? So the basis for the application is, listen, this person is already capable of driving a vehicle. They passed the tests in their, native country. Now they're applying in Brazil. So we're not going to make it then, do all over again, all of those exams and tests and this and that. So this is going to reduce the timeline for you to secure a driver license dramatically, but you're still required to have some exams done. Like I think there is a need for a medical, there is a need for a psychological evaluation, right? Like those two things at least you're going to need. I think there are maybe more requirements, but I think that the bulk of the requirements are going to be satisfied, right? Like you're not going to need like a drive test. You're not going to need to sit like for formal lessons. If I'm not mistaken, you may be required to answer like a written test. So they want to know if you know what the symbols mean, right? And this thing is going to be in Portuguese, by the way. Okay, but again, it is transferable to a certain extent. Now, in terms of a gun permit, conceal and carry, this type of thing, not at all, right? Like Brazil. Think about California when it comes to guns, right? Like Brazil probably has a huge number of guns and military weapons, but they are all with the criminals, right? Like typically, citizens would have a very hard time to get weapons and licenses, all right? And if you are a foreign citizen, I think to obtain a license, it could be even more difficult. But, let's say if you come to Brazil under, for instance, the Brazil retirement route, you secure the permanent residency. Typically, when you get the permanent residency, you are seen by the public authorities almost as a Brazilian, right? So what I can tell you, without really relying on experiences or facts, is more about, common sense, and based on our understanding of the immigration dynamics. Once you achieve, Jonathan, the permanent residency, you would have access to the same types of licenses that we Brazilians would have. Interesting question for sure. All right, Voyage. Yes, that was me joking, asking. Thank you for the total answer. It is an interesting season. Thank you for asking, Voyages. Aaron, thank you so much. Aaron is buying me lunch today. There you go, Aaron. Appreciate it. Thank you, Aaron. Really, really appreciate it. Aaron is gifting $10 here at the live stream. I really enjoy seeing that, and it does show, appreciation, and it's really touching. Thank you so much, Aaron. Hi, Luciano. Have you heard of any new cases where digital nomads can apply for citizenship after a certain time? No, Aaron. That's a big no in Brazil, unfortunately. For Portugal, Aaron, yes, it does work this way. Like in Portugal, the standard is that you live legally, right? And this is still the standard as we speak, like the new law, the new immigration law being discussed or passed as we speak is probably going to be enforced as of 2026. But in Portugal, yes, if you get the digital nomad, you stay for 5 years, you can either apply for permanent residency or the Portuguese citizenship, but not to Brazil. In Brazil, unfortunately, our understanding is that even if you stay like for 3-4 years, even 5 years, renewing the digital nomad, you are not entitled to anything, right? And the reason for that, Aaron, just to give you more elements for you to understand this dynamic, typically the routes that would give you access to the permanent residency, they are specifically informed in the regulation, right? So, for instance, when you read the regulation for the Brazil retirement visa, there's going to be a part of the regulation saying, listen, after this amount of time, you can renew the retirement residency as a permanent residency. So the law is going to be very specific when there is such access, okay? And if you read the regulation for the digital nomad, it doesn't say anything, right? And actually, on the other hand, Aaron, there is a passage indicating that the renewal should be, in theory, for just one time. Okay, now we know from experience that the current federal government is allowing people to renew for a second time. We have many clients here at the firm who were able to renew for a second time. But I think this is a narrow exception, right? Just because they're flexible in terms of allowing more renewals, I don't think this is going to reach the level of allowing you to apply for the permanent residency, Aaron. Unfortunately, right? And but that's an interesting question. Voyages, journeys, it feels secure as well as a season. Exactly, Voyages. That's another good point, and it's very interesting. Like Brazilians in general, when they are caught in this kind of registration system. Many Brazilians, they travel to the U.S., they marry, they divorce, they marry, they divorce, and they don't update their records in Brazil. Nowadays, the Brazilian consulates, they are refusing issuing new Brazilian passports if the Brazilian has not updated their records in Brazil. And they get absolutely mad, right? They don't blame themselves. They're going to blame, the Brazilian government, saying that this is just bureaucracy, red tape, and so on. But whenever you are dealing with the registries, they like to say that the registral system in Brazil is one of the best in the world, right? And I guess it's going to depend on who's judging that, because again, people from the registral system from other countries, they actually admire the Brazilian system, but whoever is caught in this kind of excessive, need for registrations, updates, and so on, they actually think is just too much red tape. All right, so different perspectives. Different understandings about the registral system in Brazil. Bill, thank you. Just curious. Keep the questions coming, Bill. Always interesting questions. Sky, how can we get our American birth certificate and marriage license translated legally to the Portuguese Brazilian office records. Right. So, Sky, maybe what you are trying to do is to record those things in Brazil, right? So let's say if you wanna record, let's say typically this journey that you're talking about is just a guess, right? Like maybe you are planning to stay in Brazil with a Brazilian spouse, and in order for the American spouse to qualify for the permanent residency based on marriage, you're gonna need to record some of these documents in Brazil, right? So I'm gonna just talk about the marriage one. For the marriage one, let's say you have a marriage that was done in Pennsylvania, right? This marriage certificate needs to be consularized at the Brazilian consulate. Typically, they give you an opportunity to pick the marital asset regime. Like in Brazil, we have different regimes when it comes to distribution of assets or the accumulation of assets. So many times the consulate is going to help you include that in the transcription. So the consulate is going to give you like a version in Portuguese, which is not a translation. It's a transcription, because they are going to basically use the information from your marriage certificate, and they are going to create something called a transcript, which has the same information but in a different format, right? And once you have your original marriage certificate and the transcription that was provided by the Brazilian consulate, then you're going to take those two documents and you're going to record in Brazil, okay? The recording that we do on behalf of many of our clients, we're going to do in Brasilia. Whenever the parties do not have a valid domicile in Brazil, the fallback option is going to be Brasilia, which is the capital of Brazil. So that's where we actually record most of those papers. And once you record, guess what you're going to get in exchange? You're going to get in exchange a Brazilian marriage certificate, right? And naturally, it doesn't mean you are marrying again. It just means you have now a Brazilian marriage certificate reflecting the information from your U.S. marriage certificate, okay? And this Brazilian marriage certificate is going to be a major requirement for you to secure residency in Brazil, all right? Typically based on marriage, you're going to get the permanent residency in Brazil right away, but they are not going to let go of those requirements, okay? So we see that happening a lot of time. People, come to Brazil, or, they apply for the family reunification visa, the consulate. They think it's the same thing, and it is not. You can only apply for the permanent residency in Brazil based on marriage if you are locally in Brazil, living in Brazil already. And you need to have, the Brazilian marriage certificate as a stepstone for the permanent residency application. I don't want to become a refugee. What papers do I need to stay in Brazil? Sky, that's a question that would potentially require other pieces of information, right? And you're mentioning registration of paperwork in Brazil, and now you're saying you don't want to become a refugee. So do you have other routes to come to Brazil? I think that would be the next question, okay? But typically, Sky, maybe just to give you some additional information, Brazil nowadays, they are making it very hard for people to come legally to Brazil unless they are coming from a developed country, or if they have a lot of resources, right? So even if you're coming, let's say, I don't know, from Nigeria, right? Which is a country typically targeted by our immigration, right? Meaning that they try to deny pretty much everything that is being applied in terms of visas to Brazil. But I don't know, let's say if you are like a businessman, and you have a lot of assets, and you have a bunch of companies and employees, most probably you would get the visa. Otherwise, no, you would not get the visa, right? And naturally, if you ask the consulate, they would never confirm what I'm saying. What I'm saying is more like from our experience, right? So, Sky, you either get a visa, you either have a very good standing to apply for a visa if you're coming from a developing, not developed, right? If you're coming from a developing country in Africa, Asia, and so on. Or another alternative, and that's not something we recommend naturally, is just something we know that is happening a lot. It's like this. A person, for instance, tries to get a visa to come to Brazil from Abu Dhabi, right? Like Abu Dhabi is where the Brazilian embassy for the United Arab Emirates is located. So a lot of people, right, from Pakistani, Egyptian origin, they are going to go to the embassy in Abu Dhabi and try to get a visa. And I guarantee the vast majority of them, probably over 90%, they are going to be denied a visa, right? And then if they want to come to Brazil real bad, like, they have that fixated idea. Sometimes what they do, and again, it's not something that I'm recommending, I'm just sharing what's going on. Many times they are going to get a visa to another country in South America, for instance, Chile or Paraguay or Argentina, and then they are going to come to the border. And once they reach the Brazilian border, they are going to apply as a refugee. Okay, so just sharing some information. And we are arriving at the end of our live stream. I want to say thank you for all of you for the support. A special thank you to Aaron, right? Like, who bought me lunch today. Thank you so much, Aaron. And letting you know, our next live stream is going to be on next Wednesday. We're not going to have a live stream on Sunday until the 31st. And what we're going to be doing is, like, we're going to try to keep our live streams on Wednesdays as consistent as possible. And then we're going to have we're going to try to have two live streams on Sunday per month, right? So we just had a live stream on the 10th. That was the first Sunday. The second Sunday is going to be hopefully August the 31st, all right? So next time we're going to meet again is going to be on August the 20th, right? Make sure to come to our YouTube channel, click on notify me. So once the live stream is starting, you're going to receive a reminder and you're going to join us, all right? Thank you so much for your presence and wishing you guys a blessed rest of your